And welcome into this episode of Lively. I'm Jim Hummel. With my guest today, we're going to tackle two topics that have been on Rhode Islanders' minds recently: Brown University's capitulation to the Trump administration and the beleaguered Rhode Island transit system. We, of course, know it as RIPTA. And let's start there. RIPTA has been in the news a lot the past couple of months as management is threatening deep service cuts if the state doesn't fork over another $10 million soon. This is not a new problem, but it's gotten much worse since COVID. Here's what Speaker Joe Sacarchi told me recently.
RIPTA needs to right-size itself, whether it's more routes, whether it's a slight increase in fares. I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that the General Assembly made a financial commitment the last 2 years, will continue to do that. We need to have an outside agency come with us, a study that shows us what is working, what is not working, and we need to adjust in that.
Would you agree that RIPTA's, I mean, we always talk about everything always seems to be at a crossroads, but it really is a tipping point, because if Rhode Island is going to be viewed as a place that has good transit, you have to make that investment, but at the same time, they can't meet their budget, so they're looking at potential cuts, and then you get into a vicious cycle.
Well, you got to look at the ridership. The ridership is going down with RIPTA. Since COVID, the ridership's going down. Why is that? We haven't cut any routes. In the last 2 years, we haven't cut routes. So why is ridership going down? What is happening or not happening on those buses? That has to be answered before you can just put more money in it.
And joining me today on our podcast, Weayonnoh Nelson-Davies from the Economic Progress Institute. Welcome back.
Thank you, Jim.
Longtime political contributor, Dr. Pablo Rodriguez, and also former professor at the Warren Alpert School of Medicine. So we'll talk about Brown in a minute, but Weayonnoh, let's start with RIPTA. This has been going on for so long, and as you've watched, it affects so many people, but ridership is down, so I kind of understand both arguments. What do you think? What do they need to do at this point?
Yeah, so I think a few things are at play right now. First of all, there were concern about whether RIPTA was being efficient. And we have the $420,000 efficiency report now. That came out August 1st. So now we know a little bit more about whether RIPTA is doing what it should be doing to manage some of its costs. The study showed that RIPTA is outperforming other public transit systems in the country. So I don't think efficiency is the only or main problem right now. We also have to look at, for years, RIPTA have been underinvested in. And that is really important in this conversation. Governor proposed a budget, zero, to deal with RIPTA deficit.
Last 2 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The General Assembly was like, okay, we will help. They gave RIPTA $15 million out of the $32 million they needed. Still a deficit. And so now we are at the point where we're talking about cuts to a system that is important, not just for the riders. We have 40,000 riders a day, but for our economy. Where are the riders going? They're going to work. They're going somewhere to spend in our economy. We talk a lot about economic competitiveness, a lot, and we want to be that. Major cities have good public transit system. Anytime I go into Boston, I take the commuter rail, I take the subway, because I don't want to deal with traffic, and I want to catch up on notes and prepare for conversations like these.
I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we still relegate transportation as a separate of the government. Okay, this is a government service, no matter what. Transportation is absolutely essential, like Weayonnoh says. And when you actually cut opportunities for people to be able to get to work, to get to the doctor, to get to recreation, you completely change the quality of life for the city and for the state. And this is something that, like you said, is economic development, and it should be part of the government. We should not relegate RIPTA to a separate agency that has to be fighting for scraps from the political establishment.
Agreed. And while we're doing that to RIPTA, you know what else we have been doing? This year, for FY 2026 budget, we are taking a revenue loss of over $240 million to pay back to local governments to make them whole for the car tax phase. So we have invested in transportation when it comes to car owners like ourselves and riders, but the public transit riders we have not invested in, and we seem to think they're separate from other riders, and we are taking a $1 million loss, but can't find $10 million to make RIPTA whole.
Absolutely. And listen, this conversation always ends up in the same place, which is we don't have enough revenue coming into the state to do the things that this state needs to stay competitive and to have the right quality of life.
And so you were thinking a $14.5 billion budget. Their total budget is $150 million. The government or the state is giving $65 million, so they have to figure out the rest between federal and fares. What struck me was they haven't raised the fares in 15 years. Now, I know that's a slippery slope, but I saw some reports, news reports where people said, I won't be able to get to my job. Now, I've kind of gotten over the bag of groceries for $50. You know, you go in the sticker shock. If your job depends on getting a RIPTA bus, wouldn't you pay an extra 50 or 75 cents? I mean, don't you think they have to look at the fares?
I think they do as well, but like Pablo said, this is important. It is a service, So looking at the fare is one part, and anytime we talk about investment, we always go to we should cut and people should pay for it. Then maybe that's part of the answer, but part of the answer is you need to generate revenue and you need to invest. And I want our public officials to talk about that piece because that's what they're responsible for. And that is fares is not the only issue, and that would not get us the $10 million we need.
No, of course, but it's one part of it.
And we get into the fraud and abuse discussion always. All this fraud and all this abuse. We're not raising enough money. We have to raise taxes in the state.
Oh, you're talking our language.
But it's the truth.
Exactly.
It is the truth. Listen, when I've been in this state for 40 years, I remember when the tax for the upper income earners was reduced by 3%, okay? When there was a recession, and there was a reason to do that, but there's no reason why we can't just do that again. 3% increase from the 5.9% of high-income earners will bring in $150 million overnight. Exactly. And the arguments are just so absolutely spurious. Massachusetts did that. What happened? They estimated that it's going to be $1 more billion into the coffers. It was $2.2 billion.
Exactly.
The argument that we're going to lose all our millionaires. Well, millionaires increased in Massachusetts by 38%.
You need to consult with Weayonnoh.
I'm loving you right now, Pablo, because you're speaking my language and you're making all the arguments we've been making. And what did Massachusetts do when they did raise the taxes and raise the money? They invested in their public transit system.
And they have free fares
right.
in certain districts.
Yes.
That has increased ridership, that has increased, that has decreased the number of cars on the street. I mean, this is a really good thing. People would think, free fares, that's communist. No, that's economic development.
Exactly.
If the workers can get to work, if they don't have to just take out of their own little salaries to pay for transportation, they will show up for work.
Yeah. And they're talking about low ridership. The reason why some of us don't take the bus, I used to take the bus all the time. I used to live at Rick, go to school at Rick and work at Rick, and I live off Chalkstone. I had to take the bus, so I had to go
Kennedy Plaza.
all the way down to Kennedy Plaza to come back to Charleston to get home at night.
Right.
So if you really have a good public transit system, we will all take it, and that helps the economy. And what I think they need to talk about more than raising fares, who are being impacted here? We're talking about those 40,000 riders. We're also talking about the drivers. We put a lot of effort in recruiting.
And now they're talking about potential
Exactly.
layoffs.
And I was part of a unionized legal aid organization before the recession of 2010. You know what happened with that? All of those who are recruited last get fired first. And so now you're going to have another issue going on within the workers union talking about who's going to go because now they're going to cut those drivers who recruited.
You made a really good point about that we've eliminated the property tax for cars. And so that encourages people to keep their cars.
Right.
Not that a property tax is maybe going to make you take the bus, but there was the Globe ran a column from a fourth generation Rhode Islander. You may have seen it. His name was Cameron Lafreniere, and he said, I'm leaving Rhode Island in part because they're not providing good public transportation. He said, I'm moving to Philadelphia. He's a fortune. If anybody wanted to stay, it would have been him. And it was interesting. He said, all those tax breaks you're giving to corporations or whatever, let's shore up the transit system first. And I think it's a little bit, look, they really do need to figure it out for the long run, but we're talking $10 million on a $150 million budget for them and a $14.5 billion budget. Cough up the money. Get it somewhere, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, you have to raise revenue.
You have to.
You have to raise revenue because, and it's not just because of RIPTA. we are facing a real crisis in the state with the cuts that are coming down the pike. Beginning in December, the Obamacare subsidies are going to disappear for many people. Some people are going to pay twice as much. Right. So, transportation is going to be an issue. And in 2 years, Medicaid cuts are going to hit like a ton of bricks to the state, which also is going to.
And I think that's maybe why the speaker was holding that card back, because I know you lobbied hard for the taxing of the upper tier, but I think if they really do, or they're going to have to fill a huge hole, they're going to wait. What would you advocate for the short term? So that's a long-term structural, maybe raising the taxes and whatever. RIPTA needs to figure out something in the next month, or they're going to have to cut.
Right.
So so the governor, just to set it up, the governor sent a letter right before the last meeting saying, I appreciate the sufficiency study, but I want you to look at it again with a couple other things. They put off the decision, but the clock is ticking.
It is.
So what would you do?
A couple of things. I think the governor needs to find some short-term money right now, because I think it has to be his responsibility for someone who did not invest anything into this deficit. I also think, though, the General Assembly is not off the hook. They went on recess. They didn't end this session because of that. They left the door open to come back in the fall to deal with what was happening in Washington. But now we also have a crisis, as Pablo said. So I will call for a special fall session to raise revenue, because we need that now. Use some of that to fund RIPTA before October 1st deadline. Put money in our Arena Day Fund, address the premium tax credits that are expiring in December, and really start planning for what's coming our way. So all of this is connected. General Assembly needs to come back in the fall. I think it's really imperative, and the governor needs to think of a way to fund RIPTA and not try to put it back on them at this point.
Okay. The other big issue that has been going on, the Trump administration reached an agreement with Brown University just within the last month. This is going on at Ivy League schools and schools all across the country. What they've decided to do is Brown is going to invest $50 million in workforce development over the next 10 years, and that frees up research money. I read somewhere they were missing out on $3.5 million a week. So it's a lot of money. Look, you were at the Alpert School for years. You know how critical research and life sciences are. Some call it a capitulation. Some call it a good business deal. What do you think?
Well, of all the business deals that have been made with the administration, this is probably the best. So let's be real.
Because Columbia really took it on the chin,
They took it on the chin. And Harvard is taking the other, extreme.
They're fighting.
They're fighting tooth and nail, which is going to cost them a lot of money, not just for the litigation, but because they're not getting the research funds, until this case is resolved or whatever happens. So Brown has ended up negotiating something in the middle, which is we're going to pay some money, which is nothing, $50 million over 10 years. It's $5 million a year.
And it's invested in Rhode Island.
And invested in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
So that's no big deal. So they came out ahead in that respect. The place where they're going to have issues is the issue with the LGBTQ community, where they are
male, female, in athletics, dorms, all of that.
And not providing, gender affirming care, which they never provided anyway. So again, it doesn't, affect them, but it is a symbolic gesture that 30% of Brown students don't see themselves as a binary. They're LGBTQ. Right. So the students are very upset that they feel like they've been made the sacrificial lamb for this policy. But in the big scheme of things, the sports were already determined by the NCAA. So they were already following those rules. So this doesn't affect them.
So I have some deep concerns about the deal, and I agree with Pablo. From a legal perspective, from a business perspective, it makes sense, right? As leaders of institutions and organizations, your responsibility is to sustain the mission and get the resources for it. So Brown made a good deal from that sense. What my concerns are about the overreach of government in higher education. Because it is beyond Brown, it's beyond Columbia, it's even beyond Harvard, who is now negotiating a settlement that makes me nervous because they were holding the mantle for
What are you teaching, right?
Yeah.
I'm concerned about that.
Who do you hire? What do you teach? Who do you admit?
Yeah.
It's a big overreach, and it's in a democracy when we talk about especially higher education stand and represent something. It represents where you can go and have dissent, you can have protests, you can have deep critical conversations, and now there seems to be a chilling effect. The government we're dealing with is on a crusade. It's on a crusade to make sure that ideologies are followed or you get punished with funding. And so what I'm concerned about with deals like these, especially from the wealthiest, most influential institutions in our country, if they are now given deals where, despite what Brown is saying, I think academic freedom is under attack because now you have to send in data for who you admit. Right. So then what do you do with that data? If it shows that black students have gone from 10 to 15%, does that mean now they're being admitted because of lack of merit?
How do you interpret that?
Exactly.
Right.
You know, so I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about other students in this deal that may feel unprotected by Brown. The trans students, Muslim students, immigrants, students of color, because there's you know, part of it is like the anti-Semitism, which is important, right? But then how do you interpret that? Can the curriculum talk about the complicated history of the Middle East anymore? Right. If you disagree, are you now in violation of this agreement? So all of those things I'm really concerned about.
Can you protest Gaza's destruction and hunger?
Because that was the whole thing. We're creating a hostile climate for the Jewish students on campus. I wonder also, though, if they're done with Brown or whether you come back for a second bite at the apple.
I think you do.
Is that what you're concerned about?
I am, because I think, again, this government is on a crusade. And, you know, even after the deal, the Secretary of Education and President Trump were celebrating that wokeness is dead. So that's their mission. So if wokeness is not there at Brown and they're still doing the things they don't like, they're coming back.
Yeah, and you know, this is my grandmother used to say all the time, you know, you cannot, you know, back down from a bully because that bully is going to come back for your lunch money every day.
Because he knows he can get it.
Exactly.
You know, but I also wonder, too, I've been thinking about, you know, with the international students, how much, and even locally here, a lot of the Asian students come and they pay a full price, so there's an economic there. I wonder if you're a minority or you're an international student, do you even want to come to one of these schools anymore?
The numbers are
I mean, the applications have got to be way down, right?
They are.
And so then what does that do for your student body?
Yeah. And for the finances of the school.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of them are paying full price.
They pay full price. Most of them pay full price, you know, in all these
do.
colleges and universities. So it is an economic disincentive for universities.
I was stunned. You know, UCLA is a public school. A lot of them have been the Ivy Leagues. They want $1 billion out of UCLA. And that system, the California system, has been in financial crisis for a long time. So if you do that, that decimates the entire system.
It does.
What do you think is going to happen with Harvard?
I think so. I read a little bit about what has been leaked about what's in the settlement. I think Harvard's really trying to push back against not releasing their data, admissions data. I think they're pushing back on that. They're still also claiming academic freedom, but I think Harvard's going to settle. And that makes me nervous because they're not sure if they're going to win. They're not sure if their endowment is going to, you know, foot the bill for what they need, and they need the research again to that responsibility of leadership. But that worries me because if Harvard crumble, and again, it's not just higher education, nonprofits are also being at risk. What does that mean for media? Can we have a lively conversation anymore?
Right. Critical of the administration.
Exactly,
right?
Can we be? And so I see once Harvard has been like this force to say, okay, those who can fight, And then what about the rest of us who don't have all of the resources in the world? Like, I almost feel like we need to start looking back to the people because institutions are going to do what is in their best interest. We have to look to institutions like, for example, the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence filed a suit pushing back on the Trump administration that required them to certify that they were not serving certain people and have one temporary order by a Rhode Island judge saying that was in violation of the rights. So we might have to look towards the little people.
The media is already under attack. I mean, this very same station, you know, has lost $1 million, you know, from funding from the federal government. That's critical. Many stations are going to close as a result of that.
In the smaller western spots, and that's the only media they have.
That's right. Paramount, CBS, ABC, they all have capitulated to the administration. So, you know, we already are there.
Yeah.
All right, folks, that's it for this time. Weayonnoh, great to see you. Pablo, good to see you.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you back here next time on Lively.